All right, guys, welcome back. Thanks for coming back, and thanks for tuning in here again. And hopefully, you got those songs really connected with you. I love those songs. I love how they seem to just, for me anyway, they get me in the mood. They get me in the spirit to be open to whatever it is that God wants me to hear. So hopefully, that's the case with you today. So like I said, we're talking about revenge today. We're talking about a verse in Matthew 5:38-42, that talks about revenge. And so actually in my Bible, we got little titles here. The title of this little section is called Teaching About Revenge. So this is Jesus teaching his disciples, but teaching us about revenge. And this is what he says. You have heard the law that says the punishment must match the injury, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say, do not resist an evil person. If someone slaps you on the right cheek, offer the other cheek also. If you are sued in court and your shirt is taken from you, give your coat too. If a soldier demands that you carry his gear for a mile, carry it 2 miles. Give to those who ask, and don't turn away from those who want to borrow. Now, like I said, this passage is not something that I like to hear or that I want to hear. Why is that? Well, for me, and I think for most of us, when we have something bad happen to us, we want to get revenge. Like, we want them to feel pain also. Like if somebody were to call me a name, my first reaction, my first instinct is to want to call them a name back. That's just how, for whatever reason, that's how we think. But that's not how God thinks. That's not how God wants us to operate. He wants us to do the opposite, to not seek revenge. And so we'll get into what that looks like here by going through the passage and by examining it like we always do. So starting back at the front, it says, you have heard the law that says the punishment must match the injury. Now this was a big thing in Old Testament times. They had a lot of rules, a lot of regulations and laws that they had to follow, that if you didn't follow them, there were consequences. There were things that happened to you because you didn't follow that law. And they had, much like we probably do today with different offenses. We have murder. If you murder somebody, the sentence is much worse. I can't talk today for some reason. I don't know what the deal is. I think maybe the dog is scaring me. But the punishment for murder is much worse than the punishment for stealing. So there's different levels of punishments based on the severity of the crime. And that was much the case it was back in the Old Testament times too. So Jesus knew this, and the people that were listening to Jesus, the disciples and the people that were around him, knew this. They had this understanding that, yes, and it makes sense to us too, that if there's a punishment, that the crime has to match with, or the punishment has to match with the crime, right? You're not gonna send somebody to life. You're not gonna sentence somebody to life in prison for stealing a marker, right? That doesn't make any sense. So they've got to fit, they've got to be in the same idea. All right? So that's the basis that Jesus sets up here. He's saying, yes, you know what? We have these rules, we have these laws, we have this understanding that if you commit a crime, you have a punishment that matches the crime. All right? But then he flips it. This is where it gets to the point that I don't like. I'm sorry, I don't like it. Maybe some of you don't like it either, but this is what it says. And so you've heard about the punishment that says or the punishment must match the injury. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. We've heard that before. That's something that's been passed down and used even today. But then Jesus says, but I say, do not resist an evil person. I just want to say, Jesus, are you kidding me? Do not resist an evil person. Why? If an evil person is doing something evil to me, if someone is doing something bad to me, whether it's evil or they're just treating me badly or calling me names or whatever the case may be, you can fill in the blank there. If somebody's doing something to me that is not godly, why should I let that happen? That doesn't make it doesn't make any sense to me. All right, so then he goes on and gives different examples with it. When he talks about someone slaps you in the right cheek, offer the other cheek also. I don't know if anybody's been slapped in their life, but it's not fun. I mean, so someone slaps you here, you're supposed to, okay, here, do it again, right? I don't know if many of you have seen, I think it's the movie Animal House. For those that have seen it, you know where I'm getting at here. But there's a scene in Animal House, I think, where the main character is, I think, part of his initiation into the fraternity, which they don't do this anymore, thankfully, but where he was to get slapped or whipped or something, and then he would say, "Thank you, sir. May I have another? Thank you, sir. May I have another?" Something along those lines. But that's what this passage is saying, right? That if someone were to slap you, you'd say, "Okay, what about you missed the spot? What about here?" And they slap you there. "Okay, you missed the spot up here. Get here. Down here. I mean, you got plenty of places to slap me at. Keep going." That's not something that we're wanting to do with us, right? Like, we don't want to be slapped. It's just not. It's not a fun thing, is it? But that's what Jesus is saying, that if this goes beyond slapping, obviously, but if someone does something to you, first off, don't fight back. Just don't fight back. Just let it happen. That's a very. It's very opposite of how we think and how we operate. But that's what he calls us to do. He goes on to say, if you're sued in court, your shirt is taken from you, give your coat too. Now, I have never been sued in court, but I can imagine that putting myself in that spot, someone is wanting my money or wanting something that I believe is rightfully mine, and the judge says, "Hey, we're gonna agree to this. You're gonna have to pay." I'm not gonna go to the judge. I'm not gonna go to the lawyers and say, "Hey, you know what? I'm gonna give you more than what you want." Doesn't make any sense, does it? It blows my mind to think that, because it's just not how we think. It's not how we operate. And so this is, again, another reason why I don't like this verse. But in the end, at the end of the passage is where it kind of all comes together and it all makes sense. All right, it goes on to say, if a soldier demands that you carry his gear for a mile, carry it too. So basically, continuing this line of thinking in don't retaliate, don't fight back, but go the extra mile. Do more than you're asked. Give up more than you're asked. Just don't fight back. Another way to say it, to think of it, is to let those who want to harm you to have their way. Just basically, Jesus in this passage is saying, you know what? if someone is throwing insults at you, if someone is calling you names, if someone is punching you, if someone is being mean to you, first off, don't fight back, but basically let them do what they want. Isn't that weird? Isn't that very, very, very weird? To me, I think it completely sucks. It's awful. I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. But why do you think Jesus wants us to do that? Why do you think that he's calling us, instead of fighting back, instead of seeking revenge, why do you think he wants us to do that? Well, he kind of wraps it up here at the end. But he says, give to those who ask and don't turn away from those who want to borrow. All right? So think of it this way. Think of, you've got one person who seeks revenge. Like if someone punches them, they punch them back. And that's always their initial first response. Someone calls them a name, they call them a name back. Somebody makes fun of them, they make fun of the other person. That's their first response. Now think of another person who, when somebody calls them a name, wants to fight, wants to pick on them, they don't do anything. They don't fight back, they don't say anything, they just kind of sit there and do nothing. If you were to look at those two people, those two responses, which do you think would be the best response, the response that Jesus wants us to do? Obviously, you're going to go with the one who doesn't fight back, right? Because if we're fighting back, there's a lot of things that go on with that, but I think a big part of it is that we're not treating that person with the respect and with the dignity that Jesus wants us to do. We're doing the same thing to them that they're doing to us, and that's contrary to how Jesus wants us to operate, how he wants us to think. And so for us to be a good witness, for us to be a good example of a Christian, of somebody who follows Jesus, we're not going to want to go around engaging in revenge on people. That's just not how we're going to operate. That's going to give Jesus a bad name. That if we're constantly seeking revenge on people, then we're going to give Jesus a bad name, and that's certainly not something that we want to do. So Jesus wants us to not seek revenge, and that's something that is very important for us to do if we want people to understand and we want people to know about Jesus.